Good morning. We'd like to welcome you to another edition of the Sunday School Review. This week's lesson is entitled Free Because of the Lord. It's taken from Deuteronomy, the 8th chapter, verses 1 through 11. And this week's lesson here, Moses is telling the new generation of Israelites as they are getting ready to enter into the promised land. And he's telling them to remember, he's giving them a warning to remember and never forget the commandments and where the Lord has brought them from. Remember how the Lord fed them and clothed them while they was wandering in the wilderness for 40 years. Now, as I said, this is the new generation of Israelites. The older generation, as you know, anyone 20 and over, except two, that is Joshua and Caleb, they died in the wilderness because of lack of faith. So what Moses is telling this new generation, as they are on the east of the Jordan River, overlooking the promised land. So as they are about on the verge of entering, crossing the Jordan and entering into the promised land, that is the land of Canaan, don't forget where the Lord has brought you from, how he fed you, how he clothed you. And this is what this lesson is about. That is, don't forget God and his commandments. And let's go to our first outline. It starts at Deuteronomy 1. It goes to verses 1 and 3 of Deuteronomy. And that outline is entitled Remember. Now, the book of Deuteronomy is referred to as the second law. Now, in this particular book here is the last words of God to the children of Israel through Moses. Okay, the last words of God through Moses as they prepare to enter into Canaan. Now, in verse 1, let's read that. It says, all the commandments which I command thee this day shall ye observe and do, that ye may live and multiply and go in and possess the land which the Lord sware unto your fathers. Verse 2, and thou shalt remember all the ways the Lord thy God hath led thee 40 years in the wilderness, to humble thee, to prove thee, to know what was in thine heart, whether thou keepest his commandments or no. Verse 3, and he humbled thee and suffered thee to hunger and fed thee with manna which thou knowest, which thou knewest not, neither did thy fathers know, that he may make thee know that man does not live by bread alone, but by every word that proceedeth out of the mouth of the Lord does man live. Now, let's go and explore these first three verses here. Now, Moses is instructing them in verse 1 to, it relates to all of the commandments. It says, all the commandments, not some, all of the commandments which thee this day shall observe and do them. Okay, in other words, do what the Lord commands, okay? That ye may live and multiply and go in and possess the land which the Lord swore to your fathers. Okay, that is the land of Canaan. Okay, now in verse 1, we see we call it an if-then clause. In other words, if you do such and such, then I will do such and such. So in verse 1, it says, if we use the if-then clause, if you observe and do all of the commandment, if you do that, the latter clause of verse 1, then ye may live, multiply, and go in and possess the land. So if you are obedient, then I will bless you. Okay, the if then. If you're obedient, then you will be blessed. Okay, now let's look at verse 2 here. And it says, it talks in the first part, it talks about how the Lord led the 40 years in the wilderness. That is their wilderness experience was to teach them a lesson, to teach them to trust and obey the Lord completely. That was the 40 years wilderness experience. It says 40 years in the wilderness to humble thee. It is to teach them humility and to prove or to see what was in that heart, to test their heart to see what it was made of. So the 40 years of wandering in the wilderness, a journey that could have been much shorter, took them 40 years, and that was to strengthen and increase their faith. Okay, it was to teach them a lesson. It was a test of their faith. In other words, because of their father's disobedience, the Lord could have gotten rid of them, could have wiped them out. No, he said, I'm going to salvage this relationship, but they're going to have to go through a wilderness experience to teach them to obey me and to trust me completely. So that's what that 40 years of wilderness experience was to discipline them and teach them a lesson. Okay, when we go with verse 2, it should teach them humility, how to humble themselves, find out what was in their heart. In verse 3, and he humbled thee and suffered thee to hunger, and he fed them with manna. Now, this was God's doing entirely. Okay, this was supernatural. The bread that they ate was bread from heaven, was supernatural, which they knew not, neither did their fathers knew, that they may know that you don't live by food, natural food only, but spiritual food. It says the latter clause of verse 3, that he might make thee to know that man does not live by bread alone, that is natural bread, but by spiritual bread as well. Okay, so he needs to teach them that you need to feed on the word of God, just like you feed on natural food. And that goes for us today. We don't live on that. We need natural food, absolutely true. But we actually need spiritual food more than we need natural food. But in essence, we do need both. Okay, so this is what verse 3 is telling us, is to humble them. This feeding them with manna from on high was all God. It wasn't man. It was all God. Okay, and let's read verse 4 as well. Thy raiments wax not old upon thee, neither did thy foot swell these 40 years. In other words, think about this. They wore the same clothes and shoes for 40 years. Their raiment waxed not, their clothes did not wear out. Their foot didn't swell. They wore the same shoes for 40 years. This was God's doing, okay? Now, and let's go to verse 5. Let's put verse 5 in there. Thou shalt also consider thine heart, that as a man chastens his son, so the Lord thy God chasten thee. In other words, chastise. In other words, that is to discipline. Okay, the parents discipline a child in order to teach them. They discipline them in love, not in hate. Okay, so as God was disciplining them for 40 years in the wilderness, it was in love, because he still provided for them. He still made sure that their needs was taken care of for 40 years as he was disciplining them. Same thing with a child. If you discipline a child, I'm not going to feed you. I'm not going to take care of your needs. No, that's not discipline, okay? That's abuse, okay? Let's be clear about that. You discipline a child. When you discipline a child, you still take care of their needs. You still feed them. As the Lord was disciplining his children in the wilderness, he still provided for their needs. As we read in verse 3, and 4, he fed them spiritual manna on high, supernatural, and he made sure that their clothes didn't wear out. That's discipline in love, okay? Not discipline in abuse. Okay, let's go now to verse 6. So when you discipline a person in love, that is to teach them, and you still make sure that their needs are met, as God met the children of Israel needs all those 40 years in the wilderness while he was disciplining them for their lack of faith. Okay, let's now verse 6. Now verse 6 starts a new outline, is given you God's requirements. This is what God requires. And verse 6 says, therefore thou shalt keep the commandments of the Lord thy God, to walk in his ways and to fear him. So there are 3 requirements here that's laid out in verse 6. The first one is to keep his commandments, number 1. The second one is to walk in his ways, number 2. And 3, and third, to fear him. These are God's requirements for the children of Israel and also for us as well. To keep his commandments, to walk in his ways, and to fear him. Okay, let's go to verse 7. Now, verse 7 says, it's talking about the land. For the Lord thy God bringeth thee unto a good land, a land of brooks of water, of fountains, and depth that spring out of valleys and hills. So he said, he's bringing them, they're on the verge. As I said, now they're on the east side of Jordan, overlooking the promised land. They're on the verge of entering the promised land. That is referred to as a good land, a land of abundance. Okay, so he said he's bringing them into a land of abundance, a land flowing with milk and honey. And a good land, verse 7 is referred to, a land of brooks of water, fountains, and depth that spring out of valleys and hills. So it's a land of plenty, a land of abundance. And let's go to 8 and 9. Read 8, 9. A land of wheat, this is continuing, a land of wheat, barley, vines, fig trees, pomegranates, a land of oil and olives and honey, a land where thou shalt eat bread without scarceness. Thou shalt not lack anything. They're not going to be lacking anything, okay? Let's do 9 here, verse 9. A land whose stones are iron, and out of whose hills thou may dig brass. Now, this is describing the good land, the land of abundance, a land flowing with milk and honey. And verse 10 is telling, Moses is telling the children of Israel, this is verse 10, when thou eatest and art full. In other words, your bellies are full. You eat, your bellies are full, then thou shalt bless the Lord. In other words, bless the Lord for his benefit, for his goodness. Bless the Lord thy God for the good land which he has given unto thee. In other words, when you come in this good land, you've eaten and you're full, your stomach is full, don't forget about God and where he has brought you from. Okay, let's look at verse 11. He says, beware that thou forget not the Lord thy God, in not keeping his commandments and his judgments, his statutes, which I command thee this day. So he's saying, be careful when you have all of this abundance, that you don't forget about God. You don't forget and keeping his commandments. Okay, and the thing about it, if you think about it, it's easy when you are satisfied. It's easy for the satisfied belly to forget the time that they were hungry. So Moses is issuing a warning to them that don't forget. And many times in life, people, when they are satisfied, when they have reached something and accomplish something, they can sit back on their laurels. They sit back and they don't think about the people that don't have, they don't think about the time that they were suffering. And the Lord is telling them, be careful when you have eaten and you are satisfied that you forget about the Lord, forget about his commandments. And that's why when you it's easily to get tempted when you reach that, when I'm satisfied, I got everything I need, and I really don't need depend on God, or in essence, I don't need God anymore. I've got over. I made it over, and this is not very good. And this is what Moses is instructing. As I said, this new generation that is on the verge of entering into the promised land, the land of Canaan, the land that flows with milk and honey. Don't forget about the Lord as your forefathers did, okay? Don't forget. And this is what this lesson is about, issuing a warning to never forget God and his commandments. We'd like to thank you for watching today. We ask you to join us next week for another edition of the Sunday School Review.